Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video. And if you're new to my channel, I create daily breakthrough videos for you to learn powerful tools that will really help you to upgrade both your life and relationships. And you'll see a lot of the videos on here, a lot of the tools in here are all about like personal development, but for the subconscious mind, because unless we engage the subconscious mind in the process of change, it's next to impossible. And that's because the conscious mind can't actually outwill or overpower the subconscious mind. It can only identify what the limiting programs are and then actually work to reprogram them. So we really talk a lot about this stuff at the subconscious level and give a lot of tools throughout this channel for reprogramming all these different things. I also have an entire personal development school with over 45 different courses, tons of live events each week, other trained facilitators of social events, study groups, and I do 4 live webinars every week in there. And there's a 7-day free trial if you want to check some of that stuff out in the description box below. So, first and foremost, other than the obvious, in terms of like long distance relationships, red flags, and this is what we're really going to focus on here today. Things like lying, cheating, addiction, these sorts of things. We're going to cover a lot of these sort of like important red flags to notice. Now, I'm going to tell you what to do about some of these things as well in here. But this is actually coming up as a topic because I've had a lot of questions this week from people in long distance relationships talking about red flags and being curious. And then obviously because of like the climate over the last sort of 1.5 to 2 years, a lot of people have been in long distance situations or can't travel to see one another and things like that. So we're going to do a deep dive here today about like red flags to pay attention to in long distance relationships. Now, one of these at a time may be a solvable problem and may not be, something much bigger. But part of this video is actually based off of over the years in my client-based practice. I have seen people who are in long distance relationships, and every so often, I would say, 1 in 30, 1 in 40, I will see certain patterns pop up that tend to be quite congruent. And unfortunately, every so often, somebody with many of the patterns we're going to mention today, 6 of these patterns, especially when all of these things are together, oftentimes when we're seeing a lot of these all at the same time, somebody may not be, they may be saying they're in a monogamous long distance relationship with you, but there may be somebody else in their life. There may be a family, somebody else there in the background that's a part of the situation. So I'm definitely not saying, before I dive into these things, that everybody in a long distance relationship, if there's one of the red flags that I mentioned here, that this is what's happening. And I'm definitely not saying that this is something that often happens in long distance relationships. I'm sort of covering the basis for people who are wondering what's going on. I'm really not getting my needs met in a long distance relationship, and just some things to watch out for so you don't get stuck in situations where you're justifying things, seeing things that you're not happy with, seeing things that don't make you feel comfortable or safe, or just like connected in the relationship, and that you keep kind of like justifying, oh, it's because of this thing or it's because of that thing. This is really going to bring a lot of stuff to sort of the surface here. So number 1 is ambiguity. So if you see, a lot of ambiguity in a relationship, that on its own is not that big of a deal, but it is a call for like going towards that problem and having a discussion to work through it. One of the biggest things you'll see in long distance relationships is because there's this space in actually not being able to see one another in person, we have to make up for this gap in space by literally oversharing rather than undersharing, so that person can like really feel like they're a part of our lives. So what you can do is share about your day and the details and the small things. And when you're oversharing, it really makes people feel connected. It makes people feel like there's not this big distance and gap, and it makes people feel safer. And like there's more vulnerability and closeness in the relationship. And I sometimes see people go into long distance relationships being like a little more avoidant, maybe a fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant together. And because they both have more of an avoidance side, they're not used to sharing as many details, not used to opening up as much. And then they get into a long distance relationship and it can really fizzle out there. So this is a really good strategy to bring in. Now, if you're not doing this, and if you're seeing a lot of ambiguity overall, where people aren't sharing what they're doing in the evening, or they share, oh, I'm just going out with some friends, and they're not including like details, and they're, oh, I'm just going out with a friend to dinner. a lot of the ambiguity, it becomes a problem because the mind is left to sort of fill in the blanks with potential worst case scenarios. And then if no party feels safe being vulnerable enough to say, what kind of friend? Hey, I would love to know details because that would make me feel closer and more involved in your life and would help make up for the distance. Then what happens instead is people just start getting into these, oftentimes like these sort of spiteful games where they'll be more ambiguous back and try to, and it can just create this like chaos. It doesn't need to exist in long distance relationships. So oversharing rather than undersharing, huge. Ambiguity, a red flag on its own, but still a very solvable problem just through approach oriented behavior and having a healthy conversation that opens the dialogue to like talk about this stuff and just share what our needs are to overcome this hurdle. Number 2, inconsistency. And again, on a small scale, not a problem. If somebody doesn't text back for 6 or 7 hours, I really don't think that's something we should be overly concerned about, especially if it's like during the day, somebody's at the, working, things like that. When somebody goes missing for a full day, a full 2 days, and you're in a relationship, I don't mean you're in the dating phase and you're like vetting one another and you haven't made a commitment. I mean, like you're in a committed relationship. You've made a commitment. If you're in a committed romantic relationship, it is completely fair to ask that you speak once per day. If somebody's going through a hard time or somebody is, they're going through grief or depression or anxiety or something really crazy, a huge career change, and they say, you know what, I'm really struggling right now. I just need some time to myself for a day or two, but they share and they communicate that with you ahead of time, very acceptable. If somebody just randomly and intermittently goes missing for a day, 2 days, 3 days, comes back, goes missing again for a day, 2 days, 3 days, comes back, doesn't necessarily mean that there's somebody else in their life, but whatever those patterns are for, those are not healthy patterns to bring into a committed relationship, especially a long distance relationship where some of your energy has to be focused on closing the gap, not allowing the gap to expand and be created more and more. So it's okay to want to speak once or twice per day. A healthy amount is to really chat, like in the morning and a little bit in the evening. Maybe one time on the phone, maybe one time over text. Some people prefer to communicate through text throughout the day. I think that's totally fine too. Often quite healthy. When there's an expectation that it's constant, like every hour you have to text back and forth, or every 2 hours, or every 3 hours, or stuff like that, that can be a lot on a relationship. It really depends on like your lifestyle and what's going on in your life at the time. Do you have a really passive job that's very low maintenance, or do you have a lot of involvement with people and client facing, and you can't be on your phone all day? And those conversations need to be had. But expectations should be discussed in terms of frequency of commitment ahead of time to make a long distance relationship that much easier and simpler. Where both of you sit down and say, this is how much we'd like to communicate. And you find a healthy compromise if you have slight differences in that area. So again, inconsistency, when it's going MIA for maybe 12 hours, every other day, there's a lot of like long form inconsistency, or a full day, you don't hear from somebody for 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, or even longer extended periods of time. That's a big red flag. And again, that's just going to create more distance when there's already enough distance in the relationship. So again, those 1 or 2 things at a time, solvable problems, have a conversation, you can work through it. Together, they start piling up. And then number 3, now we get into like when these start piling up, I start looking at like, is this person really being, showing up well and true in the relationship? So number 3, unwilling to introduce you to family and friends. Early in a relationship, not a problem. A year into a relationship, 2 years into a relationship, family, some people are more hesitant, especially more avoidant attachment styles. Some people have ideas or some different cultural beliefs about, I won't introduce somebody until I'm ready to marry the person. That's completely okay. But if you've never met a single person in that person's life, not one friend, not one family member, not one significant relationship, and you've been dating for like a year and a half, 2 years, if that starts being coupled with the inconsistency and ambiguity, we're looking at like, hey, there may be some more, deeper issues in here. Again, I'm not saying that for certain. There can be other things at play, but that tends to become a problem. And it may not be that that person has, another relationship somewhere. It could just be that they have like big commitment issues, that they have big fears of being too close, that they're unwilling to take the next steps in a relationship. Like there can just be those sorts of issues, which are red flags that you have to pay attention to. And again, have conversations about, open up. Don't walk around or justify or turn a blind eye, or, eventually, if it's been a year, you haven't met anybody in the person's life and they're inconsistent and they're ambiguous, You have to go towards these things and communicate about them so that they become problems that you work through and resolve as a unit. Number 4, not going to stay with them at any point in time. I've seen people, believe it or not, who are in romantic relationships that are long distance for 2 years, 3 years, and have never been to that person's house, have never set foot in that person's, home or apartment, have never been on FaceTime when the person's at home. Those sorts of things, like when we start piling that up with like, have never met somebody in their life, inconsistency, ambiguity, again, we're looking at either like severe commitment issues, or somebody may not be 100% real with like how they're operating in the relationship. And so again, just keep in mind, these are not, red flags do not mean run away. Red flags mean go exactly towards, but not because we're sitting around to to see what happens. Go directly towards, you have a conversation, you get to the bottom of it, and you find out, is this a solvable problem, or is this a big non-negotiable in a relationship? When we have a non-negotiable, we leave immediately, right? Those are the big things in life that we're not willing to budge on those boundaries. Then we have standards that we have to uphold. Then we have red flags, which are like sometimes just miscommunications and confusions that we have to address. But we also may find that we address red flags, we have a conversation, and actually it turns out that there's a big problem there that in fact is a non-negotiable. We wouldn't have known unless we approached it, communicated about it, got to the bottom of it, and now we know where it sits in like our life and what's okay for us and what's not. Number 5, unwilling to post on social media. I'm not a big social media person. Obviously, like I post stuff on YouTube every day. So I guess that maybe counts as social media, but personally, like I don't really log into Facebook or Instagram. Like, that I do that very, very, very rarely. And, like some people don't live their life like that. Some people are just not on social media in general. But if somebody's really into social media and somebody is spending a lot of time there and they're very active there, but then you have these piled up red flags, ambiguous, inconsistent, goes missing, unwilling to introduce you to anybody, you've never been to their home, never post on social media. Now we're looking at like somebody is probably not truly operating in a healthy manner in a long distance relationship. And then last but not least, constantly making plans and not showing up. I believe that there really should be like a 3-time rule. If you are in a relationship and, minus like if somebody's going through grief, right? Like somebody just lost a family member, a relative, or job loss or whatever and stuff, or somebody's just starting a new business or a new project and there's this big thing going on. If we are dating somebody though, and it's long distance and somebody cancels on plans 3 times in a row to meet, the relationship is around that time going to start fizzling out. Like usually by the second cancellation of plans. And if it's 3 times in a row from the other person's end, I don't mean like a back and forth. If there have been 3 cancellations in a row, the person is not invested the way you need them to be. They're not prioritizing a relationship, which has to be prioritized enough to offset if something is long distance. So again, if we have one of those red flags, go towards it, solve it, set a boundary, find out if it's a non-negotiable. Maybe somebody's like, I'm always going to be ambiguous and undershare. And you know what? I'm always going to be inconsistent and I may go missing for weeks at a time. And you're going to have to be okay with that. Maybe you're like, that's not okay with me. That doesn't feel good for me in a relationship. This isn't going to work then if we're not willing to budge. But if we have a lot of these things piling up too, then we have to really, really have our alarm bells going off. And again, I've seen many people over the years who have a lot of these patterns and do turn a blind eye and don't go towards it and have a conversation or don't, or justify on behalf of the other person. And you have to make sure that you're not betraying yourself and that you're being fair to yourself in relationships as well. So hopefully this makes a lot of sense. If you want to do a much deeper dive into like how relationships and their life cycle and how they work, you can check out our different attachment style courses that are advanced attachment style courses inside of the school. We have a lot of communication courses. We've got a whole course about communicating through different tough situations, and it's all just scripts that are out there that you can use to like navigate difficult and challenging situations in relationships. All of that is in our 7-day free trial. Link in the description box below if you want to check it out. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being a part of this channel and our PDS members on this channel. And also, of course, for those of you who are PDS members inside the actual school, I appreciate all of you so much. Have an amazing day.